Find a new way to live in Toronto's coveted Forest Hill neighborhood. Foray by Canderel blends thoughtful, livable suite design with refined finishes and more than 50,000 square feet of amenities, including wellness spaces, work-from-home areas, fitness facilities, and places to unwind. A modern, elevated community crafted for the life you've earned. Your next home starts from $599,000. Learn more at live@foray.ca. That's live@FORET.ca.
Secularism, or as it's known in Quebec, laïcité. It is the idea that not only is the government neutral about religion, it seeks to actively promote a neutral environment in the public sphere. How should Jews relate to living in such an environment? Is there such a thing as a truly secular state at all? Yedidah's away this week. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Matthew Leibel, we are not in heaven. Hello.
Hey, Avi.
Hello, Matthew. How's it going?
You know what? It's good. It's been busy. I've been traveling. I was in Kelowna. I was spending a Shabbaton weekend with the Kelowna community. I was in Calgary working with a couple of wedding couples that I'll be going out and visiting later on in the year, and then I'm back in Winnipeg. So I was like a traveling rabbi on the move, and I'm exhausted. What's that joke? I just flew in from Calgary last night, and boy, are my arms tired, right?
Yeah.
Awful. But that's how I feel.
We just got passed across our trance, and we didn't end up talking about it today. But did you hear that Calgary now has its first female mohelette?
I saw our producer, Zach, send a blurb. I did not read the whole article beyond the headline, which I'll say that quickly. What it tells me is it speaks to the fact that it's hard to find a mohel in a lot of places. Like in Winnipeg, there's really just one guy.
Well,
and Winnipeg has a huge Jewish community.
New York Magazine just did this profile on this mohel who's apparently the city's hottest mohel, and he gets like 10 a week, and he's like basically does this as a full-time job because he's a former theater kid. He knows how to handle the crowd, and he knows how to keep the family at ease, and he's apparently the most in-demand mohel in all of New York City.
When you say hottest, is it like they're rating his physical appearance?
No.
Just he just
like
got the most work.
Super in demand, yeah.
Unbelievable. That's fascinating. You would expect that in a city like New York, and then you go smaller and smaller, and then I'm telling you, I don't even know if they have a full-time mohel in Edmonton. I remember hearing that they had problems. Like these are big cities. These are big cities with doctors, with communities. Like, come on. Like, this is kind of crazy.
One of my colleagues here is basically a traveling mohel. He goes to wherever places people need him. They
for sure
call him up in the Caribbean. We don't have a mohel. Somebody just gave birth. We need a bris, and he'll go and he'll do it.
That's a great gig. And so to me, I think it's wonderful. It should be celebrated, a female mohel. I remember when we studied circumcision, studying the idea on that, and there was like openness for it. It just seemed like it hadn't really been done. And hey, good for her, good for Calgary. We need mohels. So open up the people who can apply. Is this something that, like, in an Orthodox community, would this fly?
I'm not like super up on the technical, all the halachot of Milah. From what I understand, I'm trying to remember why it's not done, but I believe that at the most basic level, it is completely acceptable halachically.
That's what I thought. I remember that's what I was kind of thinking. That it was open.
Thing.
It was just one of those things that just wasn't really ever practiced because, like, we're talking about like penises and guy things, and it just seemed to be like, kept within a man's domain.
Yeah,
truly.
The famous example is that the Torah says that Zipporah, Moshe's wife, did the circumcisions for her child. So,
but that description in the Torah, can we agree, is one of the most obscure Tarantino-esque scenes in the entire Torah? Like, it really kind of comes out of nowhere, very scary, dark. I don't know. Like, that's a weird moment in the Torah.
I can see Tarantino shooting that scene.
Yeah.
There's some scenes that are very, I like that, Tarantino-esque in the Torah, like Samson, right? Breaking down the things and then killing everybody.
Of course. Yeah,
right?
The Torah gets bloody.
But I'm saying that would be, can you imagine like that in a Tarantino? Like
he would do, imagine if Tarantino shot some scenes of the Torah. Like, how cool.
That's what I just told you. It would be. Yeah.
Like, I'm just thinking it through with you. It's great. I remember growing up in Tarantino, who has like a Jewish connection, right? Because Tzvika Peak is...
I don't know this at all.
He's married. Yeah. We got to look this up. Tarantino's married to Israeli singer-actress Daniela Peak.
Okay.
Whose dad Svika Peak wrote Shema Yisrael, and the other Shehechianu, like the bum 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 bum.
I don't know that one.
Oh man, really?
Maybe.
Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. There we go.
Repeats, right? That's Svika Peak too, I believe. Boom.
What's your? Come on, before we move on, what's your Tarantino?
Scene out of the Torah, what it would be for me? Who? You know what would Tarantino would do an amazing job with? It's the story where Dina gets.
It just as you were like.
Is that what you were thinking?
I was like right away. Oh my God, Shimon and Levi.
Yeah. Where they go to avenge her raping, basically.
Lay waste to the city. Yeah. I could see that.
That would be very, very just terrifying.
All right, let's move on to our topic of the day. So we're back in my hometown. We're in Montreal. We're in Quebec. And I don't know if people outside of Quebec are really tracking this. They may hear that there's stuff happening about secularism, but they don't quite know. So here's a bit of a primer on this before we get and really dive into this topic of what secularism is and what it's going to be doing to the Jewish community. So in April, Quebec passed Bill 9, which in itself is an extension of Bill 21, which happened in 2019, and Bill 94, which happened in 2025. All of these are various bills which started and added more and more secularism in the public sphere, where in 2019 you had a ban on religious symbols for teachers and any other public servants, right? So you couldn't wear a hijab, you couldn't wear a kippot, and you couldn't wear a cross if you were a teacher in a public school or if you were certain types of public servants. In 2025, they extend that to all school staff, lunch monitors, librarians, support, stuff like that. By 2026, Bill 9, you start seeing that they want to restrict any publicly funded religious schools, that you're not allowed to teach religion during the official curriculum hours, and you can't exclusively admit students that are Jewish, meaning you have to, in theory, admit anybody who wants to apply under penalty of losing your public funding for this, which in Quebec is a big deal. It's almost a third to a half of the money for every student comes from the government. Even in private Jewish schools. The other piece that is restricting is that you're not allowed to have a restricted diet in a public institution, meaning if you're a Jewish hospital, you can't serve exclusively kosher, or if you're a Muslim hospital, you can't serve exclusively halal.
So as you're going through the background on this, this is stuff that's already happened?
Yeah. So the original laws are still in front of the Supreme Court. So we don't know how, because there's enough challenges to this law that it's not yet settled law. But in theory, yes, these are laws on the books because they were passed by the provincial government. What
prompted this all to start happening? Right? There's no way that were Jewish schools part of the problem here? Was there something else going on here?
There's two ways to answer that. Yeah, for sure. There's two ways to answer that question. The first one is that Quebec has long believed in secularism, especially since the Quiet Revolution in the 60s and 70s, where Quebec tried to secularize itself from its own Catholic Church origins. And that in and of itself is an echo of French laïcité, right? Laws on secularism, which exist in France, where there has long been a deep desire to separate church and state as much as possible, and to restrict church or religious life in the public space.
But when those rules were made, that was because of the church, right? They were really specifically nervous about the church.
But they expand it to, in general, to everything, right? This idea of secularism.
To make the rule fit. But their target, when they made those rules, their concern back then was the church.
Yeah. Everybody recognizes that it's basically targeting, for the most part, Islam. Right. Women with hijabs, women with full face coverings, the niqab, and the fact that they are making serious inroads in Quebec society as public school teachers in other places. And there is this perception that there is a lot of radical Islamic, Islamism, and that this will curb that and make sure that Quebec remains as secular as possible.
Right. And then because they have to make it count for everyone, just as they did back when they were worried about the church, and now they're worried about Islam and radical Islam and whatever, right? You said it very nicely there. The Jewish schools, who have been operating just fine.
Or Jewish public school teachers or whatnot, yeah.
Right, but are now stuck. Because if you wear a kippah, But I also have why can't you wear a cross? To me, the covering of the whole face, that's something that to me is where there's a line. Like I just want to come out right from the beginning, right? Like kippot, cross, head coverings. I don't care. But I really do think, and we learned this in the pandemic, you got to be able to see people's faces.
It's difficult for me because I am sort of with you in terms of like we need to see people's faces in a public space. The same way that like in America, the big deal that people have with ICE right now with all of the expansionist, stuff that they've been doing going into cities is that a lot of them are covering their faces and they're saying they have to protect themselves. But people realize that the face is really important for society. I want to bracket that discussion.
Okay.
What I do want to get into is the idea that religious items will unduly influence, for example, students in school. Like if you see a teacher with a hijab, that might influence you to say, well, this person is in a position of power and I might be influenced to follow them and to do that, to whatever it is that they're doing, and that the state has to remain as neutral as possible, right? That's a big part of it, right? Is that the notion that like the state does not sponsor any religion and the state remains as secular as possible.
I know, but I don't see that that's what they're doing by having a teacher who wears this, a teacher who wears that. I see that they're making it possible for a teacher to wear whatever they need to wear. And that's what you're teaching. That's what you're sponsoring. I think by allowing them to wear it, you're sponsoring multiculturalism. You're sponsoring what Canada is all about. You're sponsoring that there's a possibility that you go into a public school and you're going to have a teacher who is anything. Jew, Sikh, Muslim, who cares? They're a good teacher, they're a crap teacher. Sure. They're a teacher. And that's what I think is going to get lost. I think it's so weird that people would be worried that we're sponsoring Islam. We're sponsoring. I don't think that that's even how the kids get it. I don't think the kids come in there thinking that either. What do you think?
I know that kids, I'm sure, are in some way susceptible to influence in some way or another. I know that there have been abuses, right? So there was the Bedford school cases, right? That was a big deal where there was a lot of Islamic influence, where teachers were basically, there was a lot of Muslim teachers, a lot of them wearing hijabs, and basically Islam was the dominant culture in the school, and it made non-Muslim students feel very uncomfortable, and there were problems, and they were like pushing Islam in the public, during public time, and that was a problem. And I get that if you're in a public school, that there is issues with how the government can and does support it. And it's different than in the States where there is official separation of church and state. Canada doesn't have that. And Canada, therefore, is willing to spend money in some ways to say that as long as everybody's getting the same thing, then it is equal. And the government is okay to sponsor or to pay for some sort of religious something if everybody has access to the same thing. So I get that there are issues and that we are different, and secularism is kind of a different thing. What does it even mean to be, a secular society, right? When Quebec says it wants a secular society, I'm not sure there is such a thing, right? I think that I personally think, and maybe tell me otherwise, I think secularism is just a majority culture that is not quite honest about what it is anymore.
I don't believe that we're on the majority totally non-God believing, whatever that God is, non-spiritual, even if your spirituality is limited to your yoga. Like I just see more people being more spiritual and or religious than not, and therefore secular would be the wrong term.
Yeah, so
is that too simple?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that what Quebec is trying to get at is to say that there should be no governmental influence on anybody's religious life. And beyond that there should be no public religion, so that everybody who walks into a public space always feels that what they're doing is secular.
Agreed.
You shouldn't feel like you are other, right? Because everybody is the same in the public sphere. But I disagree with that. I think that it's okay to have, I don't think that having religion in a public space where people are seeing it isn't coercing people into making that their religion.
Well,
and it
seems to depend, though. It seems to depend on the religion and on the circumstance, right? Like they can't just outlaw one kind of school, one kind of practice. They have to outlaw everything.
Yeah. So basically what it is that, and this is echoed by members of the Jewish community. You see people, representatives of CIJA, you see other, representatives of the Federation of B'nai B'rith, and a lot of them are basically recognizing that, yes, the Jewish community is being caught in the crossfire here.
Yeah.
And that they don't support everything. They really are like trying to thread the needle, but they support a lot of this stuff because there's so much that is anti-Islamist or anti-radical Islam. And there's such fear of that they're like, yeah, we don't want hijabs in the public space. And they're like, okay, yeah, but they're not really going to come and take away our money, or we're going to make it okay. It's like, I'm not worried about the Jewish day schools. I'm not worried about the Jewish, doctors not being able to wear their kippas. They'll wear a hat or whatever it is. And I think that that's the dangerous thing, right? When the Jewish community is, or not as a whole, because there are definitely exceptions to this. And there are definitely a lot of vocal members of the Jewish community that do not stand by this. But when I see members of the Jewish community basically say, look, this isn't our fight. We're just caught in the crossfire here. It's not that big a deal. And honestly, whatever good is happening in Quebec is so much better. And they're basically not standing on principle for something that they should be absolutely principled about, which is freedom of religion and freedom to be religious wherever and however one is, exactly the way that you're talking about it. That is a dangerous thing to do.
I was wondering, in thinking about this show, at what point does the federal government have to jump in, or can they jump in and be like, whoa, guys, like, whoa, we're letting you do this until you've gone too far, and now you're infringing on what you just talked about, Avi, because
remember,
like that's we're talking charter rights here, though.
Canada's favorite word is not multiculturalism; it's notwithstanding clause. Right. And that's what this has become. And so Quebec is basically going to say, yes, the charter of rights, but we have the notwithstanding clause and we're going to exercise our right on this one. So Quebec gets to do what they want. I think that this is really short-sighted on behalf of the Jewish community. First, I think it's short-sighted on behalf of the Quebec community. The government doesn't realize what they are doing is hampering so much in the, because they're worried about short-term gains. There's so many long-term losses that happen with short-term gains, and they're not thinking about the unintended consequences. And I think that that's true of the Jewish community also, right? It has never gone well when Jewish community aligns itself, against certain rights, because ultimately those rights end up being infringed for them as well. And that has been shown in history time and time again. And I don't think that this is a good place for people to be going in this situation.
So you'd be advocating for the Jewish community as en masse to be making more noise.
Absolutely.
Not to do this.
Absolutely. We should be saying that we don't think that it's a problem for a person to wear a kippah in a public school or as a doctor. We don't think that we're coercing anybody. And we know of as much as anybody else that we are trying to be out there in the world. We're not trying to convert anybody. And just because you wear a kippah doesn't mean you're trying to convert somebody. And we've been doing it for hundreds of years in, North America, in Quebec. We should be able to show that we are a living example that it's okay to do this, and we're not, making any sweeping changes, and we're not pushing ourselves on anybody. And the fact that Islam is now the target doesn't make us, exempt from having to, say this isn't our fight and we should move on.
It also feels kind of weird because about lots of issues, we preach speaking up, like as a Jewish value. You kind of touched on that. Like, it just seems very strange to sit and let this play itself out, say it's somebody else's fight when the Jewish community is directly affected. That's the reason. It's not you're just watching it. Like this could have. I was reading. It could have huge. Well, I mean, if God forbid they removed funding.
Yeah, I was going to say, like,
schools, they'd be toast. They would be.
Could you imagine having $15,000 or $20,000 added to your annual budget simply because now the government has decided to pull funding from Jewish day schools? How many people are going to pull their kids from Jewish day school? Are you going to have to go and create like massive funds to make sure that there's enough scholarships available? I don't know what's going to happen. I think that there are people that are worried and there are people that are not. And I'm siding with the people that are worried. I think that it's not a good thing. I can't imagine that it's not going to affect people in Jewish day schools. And we're not thinking about that long enough to be able to say, well, it's not really our fight. And we're glad that, they're clamping down on Islamism. You don't send your kids to Jewish day school, or are you planning on it?
No, but I think about this. Like my kid who's in grade 1 goes to the school in Winnipeg that has the Hebrew bilingual program. That's a public school.
Mm-hmm. The public schools that are like that are just Hebrew language, do not teach religion at all, right? They try to very carefully say, we're not teaching religion, we're just teaching Hebrew language.
But I go in there and I do a Shabbat It's like very music based in songs, but I mean, like the line is very
I
gray.
don't know how they would, react to such a school. I'm unclear whether you can create a distinction between language and culture and religion. One can try, but I think that, like, to me, what really gets me? Sorry. As a Jewish community, we have been fighting to ask the government to protect us. We've been fighting the government to say we need more funds for security. We need bubble legislation. We need to be free to be, who we are in the public. We don't want to be harassed from this. But essentially, we're also then saying to the government, it's okay that you're doing this for us, but you're also telling us we can't be in the public sphere in a certain place. And so we're asking for things that are inherently contradictory, to say, well, we would like freedom of religion, but only in our synagogues where you protect us and you put up walls around us. That does not seem like a good recipe for integrating the Jewish community into the rest of society.
No. I also want to know what's next. Like, what happens if it gets through the Supreme Court and becomes a law? Like, it's not like this is the end of the story just because we're talking about it now. I want to know where does it go next? Like, this is opening up the door to what?
Well, it's opening up the door to saying you can't have a religious symbol in a public space, period. Right? You may have to wear a kippah all the time, a hat over your kippah, or not wear a kippah at all. You can't display a Magen David because you're on a public street, and we don't want to see that. And we will, recognize that.
Oh boy,
people. I don't know. I don't know where it can go. It can go anywhere.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But it's accelerating. The idea that these laws are passing over and over quickly, and they pass them, and there's challenges, and they're at the Supreme Court. But then they pass another one adding to it, and they pass another one adding to it. It's not going to stop here anytime soon. I think that the government should be funding religious schools. Not the religious part necessarily, but I think Ontario is completely wrong in this regard, for example, where they don't give a penny to the Jewish schools. No religious schools get any funding from Ontario because they say that that's not what we do. And I'm like, they're not saying fund, Tanakh class. They're saying fund the science portion of whatever's going on in the private school. And that's fine. That should be okay. In
Manitoba
America,
does that. Manitoba's got that figured out properly. Like the Grey Academy is part of a group of independent schools that are there's a federation that they, the funding model is, I would never be able to compare it, but it exists. It's not what you're describing for Ontario, that's just terrible.
Yeah, it's weird because like in the States, there's this fight going on now also because the government doesn't fund anything, in terms of religious schools because of this issue. But there's like I said, a bigger difference in terms of separation of church and state. There's a big push towards school vouchers and school choice as an option in America, where they say there is no such thing as public schools or private schools. They're schools, and we think that it's going to cost X number of dollars to educate your child. We will give you a voucher that you can go to any school that you want as long as it's an accredited school, right? A licensed school, and say, here's the money for my kid. And if a private school chooses to add extra money for extracurriculars or for religious school or for whatever it is, then that's no longer the government's problem. And then that way you extend government funding to, religious schools as well. And
putting it right into the pockets of the people. Putting the money right into the people's pockets as opposed to giving them to the school.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that work. Well, you mentioned, I keep forgetting sometimes that you're in the States. One of the stories that came our way was about schools in the South putting the 10 Commandments up in classrooms.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like maybe in Alabama or Mississippi or a couple places like that.
Lot of so look,
what is this all about?
As much as America likes to say, we have separation of church and state, there's a lot of people that don't want that anymore. And there's a lot of people that are basically saying the quiet thing out loud, which is not that America is a secular state that doesn't seek to impose its, established religion. And people want to challenge that. And they say, no, we should be able to have, religious stuff, especially the things that we all believe in. If we're in a school and 100% of the kids or 99.8% of the kids are all Christian, we should be able to have the 10 Commandments up there as a sign of values, of universal values that we believe in.
Is that what the situation is for these schools? They're all Christian, right? Like it's...
Yes and no, because technically they are public schools, but there's a lot of people that are Christian that say that's not necessarily part of the value. The reason why I send my kid to a public school is because I want I want religion to be at home, and I want my kid to get an education and not have to worry about the religious thing. I get that. And too. I get,
And it's a slippery slope to start saying like, well, this one case is okay, so we'll allow it. That's a slippery slope. That's dangerous. Even though that school, it may be okay and it may fit everybody's values. It's dangerous to say that this is going to fit everyone's values for the time when someone comes along who wants to go to this school for whom it doesn't fit. I get all that. But, okay. You could ask the question, but one of the 10 Commandments is don't murder. So why can't we put that in there? Like that's a decent question.
I'm not saying that there are not great values in the 10 Commandments. What I'm trying to say is that to use religion as the sole source of our values is to impose religion on societies, to say this is how we have become moral is because of religion. And don't get me wrong. Hold on. I'm not saying that there is, that we can't talk about it at all. To me, the splitting down the middle, the way in which you split the difference and you're able to really work both sides of it is, I think that we should be able to teach that our morality, our contemporary source of our ethics and morals does come from a religious background. We did learn a lot of things from the Bible, from the 10 Commandments, from various sources, from Jesus, from Muhammad even. I mean, whoever it is, we have this big stew of ethics and morals, and the 10 Commandments and the Bible are a huge part of it. I don't want to deny that to kids, that that's part of it. But to go and say that this is the governing thing, is the 10 Commandments, is to basically say you cannot be a person of ethics and values without believing in the Bible. And that's
where else
a problem.
Do your morals come from? Like where else do they come from?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of philosophers that might argue that you can develop ethics independent of religion. There's plenty of atheists that are very moral people, and I respect that you don't have to be religious. I don't know a lot of
atheists. I don't know.
Oh, well, come on.
I don't know how do you. I don't know how you meet a lot of atheists. Like, where do you go to meet a lot of atheists? I meet a lot of people who probably think they're atheists, but they're not really. Their morals are informed by their Judeo-Christian principles. Like, it's very Western world. Like it's just like it's pervasive.
I just hang out in foxholes. I hang out in foxholes all the time, and I just look for atheists there, I guess.
You're not going to find any of them there, pal. I think that the idea is good. You can't force religion on anybody, but you also have to let them keep their religion. This is a Canadian ideal. That has to be safeguarded. Yeah. That idea. We're not going to force any religion on anybody, but we also are going to let you do your religion. So they have to find the balance between that. This law, this business that Quebec's into, they're not following that value for me. Like, they're getting dangerous.
Yeah, it's not good. A good example of this, as I think about this, forget about America as an example to go towards, but Israel is also a very, very complicated example, because there we see the dangers of what happens when religion and state are commingled in a not necessarily healthy way. And it's not to say that even if you're religious, then it's great because there's, Jewish law being dealt with in the courts, and every city has a state appointed rabbi, and weddings happen through the state. There are deep problems, even as a religious person, when the state has a state sponsored religion, and so many of the civil things that we do as a regular society end up being governed by religious law in the state. It's not easy. And yet Israel is supposed to be a Jewish state. And so that gets really, really complicated. And, that's the other extreme, but that doesn't mean that you have to go in a completely different direction and to say, we want to have zero any image, any thought about religion. And by the way, let's be honest, they're a bunch of hypocrites, because they're not taking down the cross from the mountain. And they're not taking down the cross from the National Assembly in Quebec. They're saying these are cultural symbols of our heritage, and they go back to our past. So yes, there's a ton of hypocrisy in this. But Israel is too much in the other direction, and that doesn't make Quebec that much better to say, well, we want to have nothing.
The story that when you talk about the Israel part, I don't even think about politics. I don't even think about the war. I think about divorces. I think about how in order to get a divorce in Israel, you have to do it. It's got to be a get. It's got to be a Jewish divorce. There's no court granting you a divorce the way my wife does family law, right? Like this is something that gets talked about a lot. Like this is, it's crazy. And the stories of how that can go horribly wrong for people who don't know, like the man has to grant it. So you get relationships. But that's how the law in that country in Israel is based on its Jewish law for getting divorced. That can be incredibly problematic for women.
But look, like I said, I get the government and I get the Jewish community's push, some form of secularizing, because too lax of an attitude ends up meaning that the government is going to unwittingly allow certain things from happening. I'm not worried about public prayer right on the streets, because those are things that happen during protests and during demonstrations, and they shouldn't be happening, period. You shouldn't be, abusing your protest permit for whatever it might be. I'm not worried about those. I am worried about places like things that happened with these schools in Quebec, in France. This is not good, right? Girls shouldn't be excluded from sports. Girls shouldn't be excluded from, we shouldn't be excluding children from sex ed and having religious pressure being attached to like all of these students. This is not the things that we should be doing. Influence is not to be denied, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a long history of us saying that's okay, we're going to go along with the secularism, and then they come for us. And that's the thing that I worry about very, very much. And so I think that we have to keep an eye on this, and let's revisit it once the laws have really passed and things have really started to not normalize, but really become part of what's going on.
It's 100% that, Avi. It's like silence now. There'll be nobody else around us to speak up when they're coming for what we really care about. So this is...
There we go.
Yeah, well said.
All right, let's move on to textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Okay, can we do a little quick chat about something in the Parsha before we do our quick little nuggets?
Sure.
So this week the Parsha is Emor, which means speak to El HaKohanim, right? The whole first chunk of the Parsha are all these laws and rules about the priests, the Kohanim. This Parsha always kind of sticks out to me because I'm a Kohen. And when I was growing up, my maternal grandfather, who's not a Kohen, used to remind me that I was a Kohen and that it was a really big deal that I needed to say in my Hebrew name, Mordechai Yosef ben Yehoshua HaKohen. That's my Zeta. And I was aware that my dad still had certain practices in his life that he had learned from his grandfather, who was the one who immigrated, who was the one who kind of moved the whole family, who was a Kohen, who, for example, he bought a bunch of plots for his family in the first row of the cemetery so that he could go and visit without going into the cemetery. He could be on the other side, right? Because
my wife's family are all Kohanim, and the issue comes up.
Right, you're
like
not
that
supposed to
again
go
and again.
into a cemetery, and that's in this week's Parsha, right? Like that's literally in this week's Parsha. So the reason why I mention this to you is because nowadays, I think outside of Orthodox Judaism, people know the rules about being a Kohen. You're not supposed to go in for a funeral. You're not supposed to go in for a cemetery, being a big example, or synagogues where they save the first aliyah for a Kohen, or they actually still do duchenin. Like, I don't even think people know if they're a Kohen or not. I'm just very curious when I read this Parsha, and it's got this huge emphasis on Kohanim in a world this far removed from the temple. And in North American society and secularism and everything like that, and where the Kohen is only for men, and so women aren't included, so that's not going to help it either. What's the future? What do you like? What's the future of people even knowing? Like, I can't be a Kohen because I can't be a pallbearer because I'm a Kohen. Like,
yeah, so that's a concern, and I think that I think there's a lot of people that, even if they don't know what that means to them to be a Kohen, they still have some of that knowledge. Grandpa told me that I'm a Kohen and I can't do whatever, or just that it's in a special class or category. I like this idea that, like, even without the caste system, right, where the Kohen is privileged above everybody else and is supposed to get, a bit of a tax of everybody's produce and all that. And that's, a big part of what it is. And you get to serve in the temple and you do all this stuff. Even without that, I think that in a liberal society, there would be value in knowing that you are a Kohen and that you are of this historically interesting or historically noble, group of people.
Yeah.
I like that.
Love that.
I think that that's interesting.
I think Judaism's too old not to have this happen over and over and over again. The context is what matters. Like, for example, when I was faced with the question of doing funerals and going into cemeteries, this was something that I thought about, right? I mean, Kohen, usually Kohanim are not often cantors or rabbis for this very reason.
Look, my brother-in-law is a rabbi, and he of a synagogue, and when he has to do funerals, it becomes a question of which colleague he can hand it off to, and what he can do with it.
Right.
And, yeah.
So
absolutely,
the decision that I made, the thinking I went through was, look, in my feeling about this parsha, and why it goes into all the detail on the Kohanim and the role that they played in society in a pre-rabbi, pre-synagogue Judaism, was they did the holiest work. They ran the temple.
Mm-hmm.
They did the holiest job in the community was their job. And the holiest of the holiest job was the Kohen Gadol. Like, that was the structure. That was what the Torah was envisioning. They weren't envisioning a Judaism spread out around the world with synagogues here and rabbis there. No one was conceiving of that. So if the role of the Kohen historically and societally was supposed to do the holiest work, when I was faced with the idea of being able to go and complete the deal for doing a funeral for a person and for the family, it felt like that was the holiest work that ever I could aspire to. And so my idea was that in the spirit of what the Kohen was supposed to do, I didn't feel of it as a violation. I felt like it was still genuine and authentic because I was in a position here, hey, I can actually do what the Kohen would maybe be needed to do in the 21st century if we didn't have rabbis, if we didn't have this. The holiest work would be done by the people spoken about in this parsha. I just happened to be in that. It was a big deal for my great-grandfather. And so rather than, just stand outside the line, which was the thing for him because of the tradition, like the thing for me was to make this meaningful, I feel like going in. So that was kind of how I thought about it. Anyway, that's something that I think about with this parsha, but it wasn't my textual healing. After the business with the Kohanim in this week's parsha, there's one of the places in the Torah with a pretty lengthy calendar. And it's really cool. I always talk about how lucky we are in Judaism to have these holidays that are literally thousands of years old, that are biblical, right? Passover, Shavuot, though it's not actually named in this parsha, Shavuot. And that's kind of a fun one in the Amor. Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur are all mentioned. And it's amazing that this calendar, that these holidays throughout the year was thought out really at the beginning. I bring it up because a lot of times, and even this weekend in Kelowna, the question came up, how do you keep Judaism going? How do you get young people into Judaism, right? And I think that this parsha, the calendar, is always is such a good answer. Like, don't just do Hanukkah. Everyone always tells me they do Hanukkah. Yeah, do them all. Just do the calendar. There's a rhythm. Every spring you should be doing Passover. Into every summer you're doing Shavuot. Every fall you're doing Rosh Hashanah. I don't care. It's like what you said. I don't actually really care. You come to my Yontif service, you go to someone else's Yontif service, you just have a lunch. Do something that makes Yontif when it's Yontif. Like, there's fixed times, there's sacred times. That's what the Parsha says. Go out and do them. And in your home's a Jewish home. Like that is such a huge building block. If every year you put up the same decorations for Shavuot, your kids just get used to it. They just grow up with it. Don't just do Hanukkah. Like the Emor is not one holiday. It's a whole calendar. And it's such a great blueprint. I feel like it's timeless. And so I feel like that's a little textual healing for you.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.
How about you?
I'm going to go to the very end of the portion. And there's this great story, right? Great. I don't know.
Tarantino could do this story.
Yes, totally. Because it involves a stoning.
Look at us ending off where we started. We're very good.
And it's about this individual, and he blasphemes God, and he's brought to Moses, and they wonder what to do with him, and Moshe goes to God, and you have to kill him, and he ends up being stoned. But there's a fascinating moment, right, where the story starts just by talking about this individual, and they don't mention his name at all. And all they say is that he's the son of a Egyptian man and a Jewish woman. The first identifying fact that we know about him is that, and then the next verse is they bring him to Moses, and then they tell you that his mother's name was Shlomit bat Divri of the tribe of Dan. And a lot of commentators were like, why did they bring it up now? Why didn't they bring it up right away? That there was this person, his mother was Shlomit, his grandfather was Divri, and right, he's from the tribe of Dan, and this is the story that happens. It's a fascinating piece in the Orach Chaim, who is a medieval Moroccan scholar, and he points out that they only talk about her after they bring this person to Moshe, because she could have stayed anonymous. She could have kept quiet, and nobody would have known anything. Right? This person goes and this person did something evil, and she could have been like, yeah, whatever, I'm not saying anything. But she stood up for him, and she had compassion for him because it was her son. And that's how we know who this person is. And he says it as sort of a warning to say, even when somebody's close to you, if they are evil, you shouldn't necessarily extend them compassion if they are truly evil. And there are dangers to extending compassion and having pity for people if they are truly evil. And then he goes and says, and the reason why they talk about the tribe of Dan is because first, your inner circle is you have improper compassion for people that are close to you because of your family. And then that extends to the tribe also. And that goes back to our Kohen Levi, tribe of Levi thing. The tribe of Dan, they stick together. And that sometimes when somebody's evil, even if they're from your group, even if they're from your tribe, right? If somebody is Jewish and they do something bad in society, you don't have to go and say, well, that's okay, it's not such a big deal, just because they are Jewish. If somebody does something wrong, you call them out for it and you don't show compassion and mercy. And then that's the lesson to learn from this, talking about this woman. I thought it was kind of cool.
Interesting story. His mom would stand up for him even though he was rotten, and his mom shouldn't stand up for him. That implication is so interesting. Like, what mother would ever be prepared to accept that her son was evil? Could your mother ever do that? No. My mom, are you kidding? No. Never.
Yeah.
Happy Mother's Day.
To be fair, one of the things that he actually goes and says beyond that is that he points out that one of the reasons why is to give credit to her, because she actually was one of the people that brought, her son to Moshe to say, oh, I'm one of those people. Right. And so you get credit for actually saying, yes, he's my son, but I'm still going to bring him to you because he deserves a punishment. Right. But then ultimately she wants compassion, and that's a problem too. So that's part of the same commentary. But anyways,
it never gets easier. It never gets easier, Ravi. Never.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.